Hello and welcome to our panel discussion today on renewable energy, hosted by Spencer Ogden, the international recruitment company specialising in the energy sector. Now, when we talk about renewable energy, we're talking about, of course, onshore and offshore wind. We're talking about wave and tidal, solar, nuclear, biomass, carbon capture, geothermal and geofuels, which is fuel cells. And we're going to be looking at why we need renewable energy in this country and what are the barriers to us taking up more renewable energy. Well, to those of you who are watching us online, welcome to the discussion. And remember that you can tweet us with your questions for the panel, for any member of the panel specifically, or just for the panel generally. And you can do that by using the hashtag and going to #RenN11, or you can email us the questions that you'd like to ask. I've got my iPad here so I can get them live. And you'll need to email renewable@toplinecoms.com, and comms has 2 M's, and I'll do my best to put as many of those questions as I can to the panel. Well, we've got 7 members on our panel, so let me tell you who we have here first of all. Starting at the end, we have Ben Goldsmith, who is the founding partner of Webb Ventures. Now, Ben has 9 years clean technology investment experience and is recognised as a leading clean technology investor, co-founding the company in 2002. Moving along one, we have Matthew Hammond, who is a partner at Webb Infrastructure. Now, Matt, as you like to be known, I think has over 15 years experience as an advisor and principal investor in infrastructure assets. Now, next up and next to me is Michael Lewis, who is the MD of E.ON Renewables. Now, Michael is Managing Director for Europe within E.ON Climate and Renewables, where he's responsible for the on- and offshore wind business, worked in the energy industry for 18 years. Now, on my left, we have Hugh Iranka-Davis, who is the Shadow Minister for Energy and Climate Change, and Hugh's been the MP for Ogden in the South Wales Valley since 2002 and was Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State, Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs from October 2008 until Labour's defeat in May 2010. Next up, we have David Spencer Percival, who is Chief Executive of Spencer Ogden Renewables. And David has spent the last 12 years working in specialist international recruitment in the area of energy, renewables, but also oil and gas and nuclear. Moving along one further, we have Lord Chris Smith, who is chairman of the Environment Agency. And in 1992, as an MP, he joined the Shadow Cabinet as Shadow Secretary of State for Environmental Protection, and then 2 years later moved to Heritage, then Social Security and Health, and then in 1997 became Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, and Chairman of the Millennium Commission, and stood down from the House of Commons in 2005. Last but not least at all is Bernice Lee from Chatham House, which is the home of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the think tank, and Bernice has contributed to many papers on energy and the environment internationally, and particularly China of recent times. So that is our panel for you. And what I'm going to do is ask a few questions to start off the debate, and then I will be taking your tweets and emails live and putting them. So what I perhaps wanted to do was start with Hugh. You're next to me, so you're an easy target. Now, do we have an energy crisis in the UK, do you think?
No, we don't, but we need to plan very rapidly to avoid one. And the reason I say that is everybody's very aware of the figures that are often cited, the need for investment to fill the energy gap that is looming, and it is imminent. That's why I say we don't have a crisis, but it is just around the corner. And whether that is nuclear or gas or CCS being added to coal or gas or renewables and so on, we know that we have to get a move on very fast. And I think the stage that we're at this moment, particularly within the UK, is not only a question of restating our credentials as a world leader in renewables, in energy policy and so on, but it's also a moment in time in which we have to have a cross-party, and I think we do, by the way, but we have to use that cross-party consensus to actually put certainty into the market that we will drive investment in and fill that energy gap before we do have a crisis.
That's it. And if I can go to you, Lord Chris Smith, I mean, do you think that renewable energy is something that has to be invested in massively, or are we on the right track, investing the right amount, or what?
We're nowhere near investing the right amount yet. We do have a crisis. It's called climate change. And one of the reasons why we need to invest very heavily in renewable energy is in ensuring that we can play our part in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The target set by legislation, by our agreement with Europe, the target is for a 15% reduction in UK, a 15% contribution in the UK from renewables by 2020.
And it's only, what, about 3% now, isn't it?
That's only 8.5 years away, and at the moment it's 3%. So we've got a huge gap to make up. Now, there's a lot of work going on to look at the ways in which we can make up that gap, but we need to get a move on.
Now, are we on track to meet that target? What does anyone else think? Would anyone like to come in? Ben?
I mean, in my business, we particularly look at the efficiency end of things, as well as generating new capacity, which is Matt's area of specialism. There's a huge opportunity in becoming more efficient in our use of energy, both nationally and regionally through the development of smart grids, but also across businesses, across people's homes, and that's about unlocking capital, because the returns on investment for energy efficiency can be even better than the returns on investment through developing new sources of energy.
What do you think, Matthew, if you're involved in putting the investment in now?
Yeah, I think across most of Europe and particularly the UK, there remains a significant challenge, and I suppose the part of it that I always get to is there's a lot of government incentives all across Europe and leading the world in that sense, which has driven an enormous amount of investment. It's I think we're still lagging behind where we need to be, both for addressing climate change concerns and just for generating enough electricity to replace a very, Europe is burdened with an extremely aging generation fleet that's got to be replaced before you even start talking about, this sort of electrification of the sort of transport industry with electric cars and things further in the future. I think, the first remarks that Hugh made were right, though. There's no sort of crisis now, but the thinking and the planning ahead, it works over such a timescale that you really need to embrace as quickly as you can. Particularly if you're thinking about, does nuclear have a role or not? These things have taken an enormous time to come about. You need to look ahead, and that's a very difficult environment where the cost of all the different technologies changes so quickly. Solar energy, prices are collapsing and continuing to collapse. How do you set policy and address that? When do you know what the price of solar energy is going to be in 1 year or 2 years' time? No one who made predictions 5 years ago was right. So it's an extremely difficult area.
And that kind of, what the markets like is certainty, don't they? And so how is that feeding into investment and decisions that you're trying to make and that the whole sector's trying to make?
Well, there's an enormous amount of noise around legislation and incentives for renewable energy. In some ways, though, to put an optimistic spin on it, most of the European regulatory framework that's sort of been copied a little bit here, that feed in tariffs and etc., have been a victim of their own success. They've promoted enormous development of things, have been enormously successful. It is exactly the regulatory framework that investors want to see. The problem with that is that it's generated such capacity, it's allowed such economies of scale to finally emerge in solar particularly and wind as well, that the prices of those things have fallen dramatically. And so governments have had to lower tariffs, which is exactly what should happen, but lower tariffs quicker than they thought they would. And for some governments, the Spanish government sort of famously, it's really caught them out. But it was a problem of success, not otherwise. And thankfully, we're in an environment now where the incentives governments need to offer are much lower than they used to be. The great burden for renewable energy was always cost. We're rapidly approaching in the next couple of years an era when that is no longer the question. And it's simply more about practical implementation of things and actually just making projects happen, when most a lot of renewable energy, particularly solar, doesn't get delivered in a traditional way. Utilities don't do it. Utilities have all the skill sets.
It's individual people, you mean, putting the panels on their homes and things like this?
Panels on your home or small solar fields. The sort of all the local guys all across Europe and the world who develop these projects do not have the skill sets that utilities have in the traditional oil and gas areas of the world. That's a huge challenge.
Go ahead.
The cost of renewables, though, depends on the state of development of the technology. It's much more expensive, for example, at the moment to develop wave and tidal power than it is to do more solar power, which we all know about. And because we need to, as it were, this is a horrible phrase, fire on all cylinders, we need to use every conceivable means of renewable technology that we can, because the broader the palette, the more chance we have of reaching our targets. There will be a variety of different costs. And the more infant the technology is, the greater the cost is going to be.
Hugh wants to come in.
But this is where renewables do actually play a trump card. This is where I have to say, at danger of repeating a very familiar phrase to many people, I agree with Chris Hume. When Chris has argued that we have to make use of renewables because our energy security in the future, as well as our affordability, is dependent on it, because otherwise we simply make ourselves hostage to the vagaries of international oil prices and so on. We are uniquely positioned within the UK. It's not only a flight of rhetoric, it's absolutely true to make use of wave and tidal, to make use of wind, and so on. But we also need to make sure that we're doing the right cost-effective decisions on investment, not only in grid in the UK, but in grid connectivity around Europe, because part of our energy security, including with renewables, is in having the ability to transmit back and forth across boundaries as well. It isn't just UK energy security, it's trans-frontier energy security as well. But in order to get there, I think we need certainty, and the certainty comes from the politicians setting the strategic overview, the high-level approach of what we're doing, and then finding a way that politicians actually step back from it and allow it to happen. Not necessarily picking winners, but Chris is right. I mean, for example, politicians will always need to say, we need to get more investment into solar as we've done, victim of our own success. I agree with what you're saying, but look at how the prices are tumbling. We need something that can adjust that in a dynamic way reflecting the market. We need to do the same with wave and tidal. But politicians need to set the high level and then step back and have something that operates with the dynamics of the market. It's fast moving, changing every day. We can't anticipate what the next technology will be. We need something else to do that for us.
Now, go ahead, yes.
I think it's important to say that there is a long lead time for one of these projects. If you take the London Array, which E.ON is currently investing in, that project has been developed over a 10-year period.
Now, for people who don't know what that is...
Sorry, that's the largest offshore wind farm in the world, 1,000 megawatts in the Thames estuary. And that project alone has taken a huge amount of development time. When we started it, the incentive system was quite different from today. So I don't think we should expect investment to respond instantaneously to changes in the legislative framework. What happens is you see a build-up slowly and then an exponential growth. And I think that's what we're about to see now in offshore wind, which is where all of the major utilities have come in, they've developed the projects, and the growth is really kicking in now. And we'll see it for offshore wind, we're seeing it for onshore wind. And if you look globally, we now have a situation where $187 billion was invested in renewable generation last year, compared to just over 200 in conventional. So they're almost the same. It's become mainstream. But it takes time.
So with that, Ben, you were making...
A lot of this new capacity, though, is going to come in the form of smaller projects, the kind of 2, 3, 4, 5 megawatt projects. Matt and his team have a pipeline that's 80 times the size of any fund that they might raise. And the only way we're going to get those smaller projects built, the whole distributed model, is if the asset class becomes institutionally credible. At the moment, it's not. It'll only happen if pension funds and other investors start writing out checks to invest in this stuff. And I suppose that's the challenge for the likes of Matt and the other kind of infrastructure investors around town, is to deliver through results and deliver great returns. Because then in 2-3 years' time, you'll see big investors investing in this stuff in a big way.
Can I pick up on the infrastructure point as well? I mean, clearly the trends are clear at the global level. As Michael said, investments has been growing. We all know that we need long, loud, clear signals that would enable that kind of investment over the long term. But I also think that there has to be more investment in thinking through how to integrate these new options into the energy system. And this is, where the utilities and others have a very unique role in helping us figure out those solutions. Because it's one thing to have lots of renewables investment, is another if we don't have enough infrastructure to bring them online at a speed that is commensurate with what we think are needed.
This is indeed what most of the larger utilities, including E.ON, are doing. We don't say for 1 minute that renewables will solve the problem, the climate change problem, or the security of supply problem. It will make a very material contribution to both of those, and of course to creating new green jobs as well. But we also need investment in nuclear power. We also need investment in conventional fossil fuels to provide the backup. And that's what we're doing, pursuing a portfolio of investments across each of those technologies.
What I wanted to ask, and I don't really mind who answers it, but what do we need to do to make wind energy economic? Does the oil price have to hit $200 a barrel? Do they have to produce 10 megawatts? I mean, what do we have to do?
Well, the fact of the matter is, it is already economic in some places. It depends where you are. If you look at the marginal price of power compared to a very high production, high wind site in a place where the marginal price of power is high, then it's already competitive. It's competitive with the new entrant coal power plant when the cost of CO2 is factored in. So we're already there for onshore wind in the right locations. For offshore wind, there's some way to go, but it's all about the supply chain building up to meet the demand that is coming. And this is where I come in again with the long lead time required, but we're going in the right direction.
There you go.
It also depends, of course, crucially on the carbon price. What we don't yet have is the certainty that we need in terms of planning for the carbon price in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, that ought to be there if we're going to make sense of this whole field.
Just getting a couple of questions in by email. I've got someone called Hannah Worrell is saying, when can we expect to see the cost of renewable energy reduced far enough to become a viable means of energy production in the UK? Anyone?
Well, I think it was just said. I think all of the different renewable energy technologies have different prices. But onshore wind in windy places is pretty much is there now. Easily, you see in places with a lot of wind, windy days in Denmark, the price of energy is pushed to zero.
Although we do see this thing of wind turbines being switched off, don't we? Because they can't feed into the grid, say at night when it's not being used. We do see that, don't we?
Occasionally, yes, and I think that's what that highlights is no one would ever pretend that you can have your entire energy supply coming from one source, particularly wind. I mean, it is an unpredictable, volatile source. But is it cheap enough? Yes. Is it ever going to be half or 3/4 of our energy? No. So we're going the right way with wind. All of the predictions from all of the major solar panel manufacturers are that by the end of next year, they're expecting to sell modules at $1 a watt, which is the sort of utopia where solar energy in sunny and not even very sunny places becomes competitive. You can't roll out solar energy particularly easily. I mean, no matter how big your plans are, it's a panel at a time. You need a local industry everywhere to do it. But that is where we're getting there. So that those pieces of the puzzle are coming together. Some of the other technologies require a lot more investment. But I think in terms of a UK specific answer, the big driver here in the near term is offshore wind. Solar or onshore wind are never going to contribute as much as we'd like in the near term. The big answer for any of the problems that renewable energy can solve is all about getting offshore wind to work for a UK-specific scenario. And that requires a lot of, there's sufficient institutional money there that is not yet, we don't quite yet have projects that are simple enough or easy enough for that money to get into. And this is where utilities and government are working together to try and sort that out.
Now, you say, Matt, there's sufficient institutional money. But I've got a question, actually, for David. Is there sufficient skills? Do we have the people?
Short term, no. There's an acute shortage of skilled people. Very small pool, particularly in offshore wind. lots of companies headhunting each other because they're reluctant to use skills from other areas like oil and gas has been working offshore for a long time.
Now, why are they reluctant to sort of mix?
They're just looking for such specific people with the specific skills to get the job done quickly. So yes, acute short-term problem. Medium-term, again, lack of engineering graduates, lack of apprenticeships. You talk about the energy mix, you need 10,000 people to build a nuclear power station. It's a very big project.
And we've got another 10 or 12
7 to
coming,
10 of
haven't we?
those, that's a lot of engineers and a lot of skills. And then you add into in the mix renewables, as well as at least 30% of all the executives in oil and gas are due to retire in the next 10 years. So when you put all energy into the mix, huge shortages.
Now, how do you get more people into engineering? I mean, is it the same in all countries that nobody wants to do engineering, or do we have a problem here?
I think it's across, well, it differs. UK, there is a problem. I think a lot of people were seduced by the financial institutions to go into finance because of the booming economy up until the recession. It became unfashionable to become an engineer. It's a lot better now, but it's very, very slow. The numbers required are in their hundreds of thousands to build the infrastructure and the projects that are needed. How do you get around that? Well, immigration, skilled immigration is one way.
Although we are cutting down on immigration.
Yeah, so that will be fun. And the flexibility about hiring cross-sector is one of the key ways to get around it.
Hugh.
I just want to make an observation. It isn't a recent development, the fact that we don't have, through our secondary schools, enough people going into the sort of subjects that will lead them into careers in engineering, in hard technical subjects. But if you look at whichever way we carve up the energy future that we are looking for, whether it is nuclear or renewables or oil and gas or whatever, one thing is certain, there is going to be a massive investment and a massive expansion, not only within the UK, but worldwide. In which case, one of the things the government should be thinking about right now is how it plans that right through the education system. How do you engage with the sectors as well to talk about proper sector-led engagement, not simply at graduate level, as we were talking about earlier on, David, but also at secondary school level, so that youngsters can see here are guaranteed good, not only good careers in terms of earnings capacity, but ones that are long life. Because in order to build the sort of capacity that we're talking about within the UK and worldwide, we're right at the start of it. So that's where I think it needs to be. It's not at the taking people out of university. It's not actually, even though I understand the immediate point in terms of immigration and what the government is doing in that. It's the much more longer term thinking about bringing school children through and directing them into these sort of careers.
I've just got a question we've been tweeted from Mark Truman, which says, how can offshore wind counter the Committee on Climate Change's recent encouragement for nuclear power? Don't know who wants to go for that one. I'm looking at you, Lord Smith. Or
Well, I could quite simply answer that is there's nothing to counter. The two are compatible. It's as simple as that. You need nuclear and you need offshore wind, both of which will provide a material contribution to reducing CO2 emissions and to providing energy security for the UK. I just don't see the conflict.
They do both need to be part of the picture. If you'd asked me 15 years ago, I would have said no to nuclear power, largely because of all the waste issues, which at that time were totally unresolved. They're still not resolved enough.
difficult to get rid of the waste safely.
Yeah, and we need to do a lot more work on the waste issues around the nuclear industry. But climate change has made a realist.
We export that waste, don't we? We send it to China, don't we? Is that the?
No, I'm afraid we import it at the moment, or we have over the last 10 years or so. But the nuclear has to be part of the answer. And looking to the next 40 years, in the course of which we need to virtually decarbonise the whole of our electricity production, looking over that period, we need a combination of a lot of work on energy efficiency, so we use less energy to do the same things that we do at the moment, a lot of work on developing renewables, going for carbon capture technology in order to clean up fossil fuel production, and nuclear. They all have to be part of the answer.
And can I just add to that, the other significant recommendation was that we need to do more, and I acknowledge this, in terms of onshore. We know, I mean, it's been an accusation that was levelled at the previous Labour administration. I take what you're saying. We built the platform that will now lead to this great expansion in offshore wind, but it is more expensive. So understandably, the Climate Change Committee have said we need to do more with onshore, recognising it's a great resource and it is cheaper. But of course, the reason people accuse us or pointed at us and said, well, that was a wasted decade, was because we couldn't get enough onshore done. Why? Because of the issues of a local planning, the issues of democratic local accountability and people having their own say. So it is going to be an intriguing one to see whether in the next decade ahead, we can actually up the ante on onshore wind. And just one other point. One thing that would help the whole of this discussion is if we actually accepted the 4th budget report of the Climate Change Committee. If we actually said we're going to act on it, we're going to take their recommendations, we're going to legally bind ourselves to drive